It was one of those blistering days where the heat seemed to pour from the sky in waves, rippling across the pavement and suffocating the air itself. The digital display in my car flashed 101 degrees, a number that felt almost surreal. But life doesn't stop because the sun decides to turn the world into an oven. I had promised myself that today I'd finally drop off the overdue HOA paperwork. It was just a quick errand, 2 minutes max. My 5-year-old daughter, Emily, had fallen asleep in the back seat, her cheeks rosy from the heat of the earlier playground trip. The car's air conditioning hummed steadily, a soothing white noise that kept her cool and comfortable as she dreamed. I parked right in front of the HOA office, its glass doors gleaming under the harsh sunlight. The lot was empty, save for a few scattered cars. I glanced back at Emily, still sound asleep with her tiny fists curled against her chest. The engine was running, AC blasting. I cracked the front window slightly and made sure the doors were unlocked. The office was within eyesight. I would be back before she even stirred. With a lingering glance at my daughter, I hurried inside. The air-conditioned office was a sharp contrast to the oppressive heat. I handed over the paperwork and exchanged a few pleasantries with the clerk, my mind half in the room and half on the car outside. I kept my conversation brief, eager to return. Barely 2 minutes had passed. As I stepped back into the sunlight, a sinking feeling gripped my chest. From across the lot I saw her, a woman I'd grown to dread. Karen. The self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, ruler of petty rules, and enforcer of the HOA's finest minutiae. And she was standing by my car, phone in one hand, an expression of smug satisfaction plastered across her face. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Emily was awake now, her small face pressed against the window, tears streaking down her cheeks. She was pounding her little fists against the glass, her mouth moving in silent cries I couldn't hear, and the doors, somehow, impossibly, were locked. The car was sealed tight, trapping my daughter inside the sweltering metal box. Panic surged through me. I sprinted toward the car, my heart hammering. Karen's voice sliced through the air, cold and condescending. "You should be ashamed. I called security. The police are on their way." Our neighborhood was one of those planned communities that looked perfect on the outside. Manicured lawns, pastel-colored houses, winding sidewalks shaded by identical rows of young maple trees. It was the kind of place that at first glance seemed straight out of a magazine ad for suburban bliss. But beneath the picture-perfect exterior lay the quiet, relentless grip of the HOA. They controlled everything, from the color of your mailbox to the height of your grass, and God forbid you forget to bring your trash cans in by the precise designated time. The rules were exhaustive, the fines steep, and the board members reveled in their power. I had never imagined myself living under such suffocating oversight. But when we bought our home 3 years ago, it was one of the few affordable places left in the area with good schools and safe streets for Emily. We figured we could deal with the occasional stern email or fine. We hadn't counted on Karen. Her real name was Karen Wilkins, but no one in the neighborhood ever called her that. To us, she was simply Karen, a walking stereotype of every HOA horror story rolled into one sharp-eyed, sharp-tongued woman. Middle-aged, always impeccably dressed, even when walking her tiny, yapping dog, she seemed to appear out of nowhere whenever someone committed even the slightest infraction. Her eyes were forever scanning the neighborhood, searching for violations to report. A garden hose left out for an extra hour, expect a notice, kids drawing with chalk on the sidewalk, prepare for a stern warning, and if you dared question her authority, you'd find yourself the target of her wrath, with escalating complaints and a barrage of passive-aggressive notes on your door. I had crossed paths with her more than once. The first time was over a potted plant I placed on our porch, a vibrant burst of color that apparently violated the uniform aesthetic of the neighborhood. The second was when Emily left her scooter on the front lawn for an afternoon. Karen documented it with photos and submitted them to the board as evidence of our habitual disregard for community standards. It was laughable in a way, until it wasn't. Over time, the stress of living under constant scrutiny began to wear on us. I tried to ignore her, to keep my head down and follow every rule to the letter, but it never seemed to be enough. Neighbors whispered about her behind closed doors, but were too afraid to confront her openly. She wielded her influence over the HOA board like a sword, and no one wanted to risk the hassle of her retaliation. She seemed to take particular delight in targeting families with young children, perhaps annoyed by the joyful noise and occasional messes that naturally accompanied them. I often wondered what had made her this way, what kind of bitterness fueled her relentless need for control. That morning, as I prepared to run my errand, I hadn't given her a second thought. It was too hot for even Karen to be prowling the sidewalks, or so I had assumed. I should have known better. In hindsight, it felt inevitable, as though she had been lying in wait for the perfect opportunity to make an example out of someone. And this time, the stakes were far higher than a misplaced scooter or an unauthorized potted plant. My daughter's life was about to be caught in the crosshairs of Karen's misguided sense of righteousness, and none of us would emerge unchanged. That morning had started like any other, except for the unbearable heat. The forecast had warned of triple-digit temperatures, and by late morning the sun was already a punishing force overhead. Emily and I had spent the early part of the day at the park, squeezing in some playtime before the worst of the heat set in. By the time we returned home, her cheeks were flushed, her energy spent. She barely made it through lunch before collapsing into a deep nap. I had one lingering task that couldn't wait any longer, dropping off the HOA paperwork. It was a quick, boring errand, one I had put off too long. It was tempting to leave it for another day, but the deadline was looming and fines were no small matter in our neighborhood. I glanced at Emily, sleeping soundly in her car seat, her head tilted to one side, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The thought of waking her for a 2-minute errand seemed cruel. The HOA office was just 5 minutes away, and I could park directly in front of it. The building had large glass windows, and from the parking lot I would have a clear view of the car the entire time. The plan was simple: keep the engine running with the air conditioning blasting, lock nothing, stay within eyesight, be in and out in no time. I grabbed my purse, double-checked that the air conditioning was on high, and opened the windows slightly for good measure. The car was a safe, cool cocoon in contrast to the stifling air outside. Emily stirred slightly but didn't wake. I hesitated for a moment, my hand on the door handle, peeking back one last time. Everything looked perfect. Just 2 minutes, I told myself. I wouldn't even get out of sight. The HOA office sat in a squat brick building, unassuming except for the pristine landscaping and a gleaming metal plaque announcing its presence. I parked in a shaded spot just feet from the front door, checked my rearview mirror to see Emily still resting peacefully, and stepped out into the oppressive heat. The blast of hot air felt like a physical wall, but I was determined to make this errand as quick as possible. Inside, the office was empty except for a single, bored-looking receptionist. I handed over the paperwork, exchanged a few polite words, and signed where needed. Less than 2 minutes passed, long enough to confirm that I had done everything by the book, short enough that my daughter should still be peacefully asleep in the car. Feeling a small sense of relief for having finally handled the task, I turned back toward the door, ready to get Emily home and out of the heat. But as I stepped outside, blinking in the blinding sunlight, I sensed something was wrong. The parking lot, which had been empty moments ago, now had an unwelcome figure beside my car. The sight stopped me cold. Karen was there, her posture rigid, her phone in hand, her eyes gleaming with self-righteous satisfaction. And inside the car, Emily was no longer sleeping. She was awake, frantic, her tiny fists pounding against the glass, her face twisted in panic. The doors, somehow, were locked. My heart plummeted. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. I broke into a sprint without thinking, my sandals slapping against the pavement, my heart pounding so hard it was deafening. The distance from the office door to my car felt like miles. I could see Emily's little face pressed against the window, her mouth open in silent sobs. Her tiny hands beat helplessly on the glass, fogging it with each desperate breath. And standing there, cool as a cucumber in the blistering heat, was Karen. She didn't even flinch as I approached. If anything, she straightened her posture and tilted her chin in a defiant sort of way, as though she were a school principal about to scold an unruly student. Her phone was pressed to her ear, and she was mid-sentence when I reached her. I barely registered the words. Something about child endangerment, irresponsible parenting, police en route. I lunged for the driver's door handle and yanked. Nothing. Locked. I tried the back door. Same result. The car was sealed tight. Inside, Emily's sobs turned to screams as she saw me struggling, her little voice piercing through the thick glass. "Mommy, Mommy, I'm hot!" The words stabbed straight through me. I tried the passenger door, then the hatchback, fumbling with trembling fingers. Every door refused me. "What did you do?" I gasped, spinning to face Karen, who remained disturbingly composed. "I secured the vehicle," she replied, her voice flat and dripping with smug superiority. "I found an unattended child in a running car. You should be ashamed of yourself." "You locked my daughter inside. It's 101 degrees," I shouted, panic tightening my throat. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. Break the window. But which one? How fast could I get her out before the heat overcame her? Karen waved her free hand dismissively. "The authorities will be here shortly. I suggest you refrain from making matters worse." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The engine was running, yes, but I had left the doors unlocked. I had been gone less than 2 minutes. Somehow, this woman, this relentless enforcer of community order, had taken it upon herself to interfere in the most dangerous way possible. My desperate fingers pounded on the window, trying to soothe Emily. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's right here. We're going to get you out." Her little face was red and soaked with tears. The cool air inside the car wasn't enough anymore. The sun had turned it into a greenhouse, and every passing second was making it worse. A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Some neighbors murmured in disbelief. Others looked uncertain, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of Karen's way. One elderly man called out, "Somebody break the window!" Karen shot him a glare that could have frozen water. "Do not touch the vehicle. The police are handling it." I dialed 911 with trembling hands, explaining the situation through gasps of breath. The dispatcher's calm voice grounded me for a moment, assuring me that help was already on the way. I could barely focus as Karen continued her monologue for the benefit of the gathering crowd, spinning the story into one where she was the hero saving a neglected child. I wanted to scream. My baby was trapped in a sweltering car, and this woman was more concerned with her reputation than my daughter's life. Minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity. Sweat poured down my face, my vision blurred with panic. I crouched by the window, singing softly to Emily between choked sobs, trying to keep her calm. She was slowing, her movements sluggish, her cries weaker. Sirens wailed in the distance. Help was coming, but would it be fast enough? As the first wail of the approaching sirens echoed through the heavy, stagnant air, I pressed my forehead against the driver's side window, desperate to stay connected to Emily in any way I could. Her tiny hands had slid from pounding the glass to simply resting against it, her flushed cheeks streaked with tears. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps now, her once vibrant eyes dulled with exhaustion and fear. I fought the rising wave of hysteria that threatened to overwhelm me. I couldn't afford to break down. Not now, not while my baby was still trapped. I turned to Karen again, voice raw with desperation. "Please, please unlock the doors. You can still stop this." My words came out as a pleading sob, my pride stripped away. I would have gotten on my knees if that's what it took, but she remained unmoved, her arms crossed, her mouth curled in a thin, disapproving line. "You clearly don't understand the seriousness of your actions," she said coolly. "I'm not about to tamper with the evidence of child endangerment." Evidence. The word sent a cold shiver down my spine. In her twisted mind, this was no longer about a frightened child in mortal danger. It was about teaching me a lesson, about building a case to wave in front of the HOA board and the police. The crowd had grown larger now, voices murmuring with mounting concern. Some stared at me with sympathy, others with uncertain curiosity. And Karen soaked in the attention like a performer on stage. I pounded on the windows again, calling out to Emily in as soothing a tone as I could manage. "Stay with me, sweetheart. The police are coming. Mommy's here, just a little longer." Her eyes fluttered in response, her small body slumped in the seat, sweat dripping from her brow. The AC was no match for the relentless sun baking the metal shell of the car. Time was slipping away. A young man from the crowd stepped forward, his jaw set. "I'll break the window," he said firmly, reaching for a tire iron from his truck bed. Relief surged through me, but before he could take another step, Karen thrust herself in front of him. "You will do no such thing," she snapped. "If you damage that vehicle, you'll be charged with vandalism." Her voice was sharp, commanding, bolstered by years of bullying neighbors into submission. The young man hesitated, torn between the impulse to help and the threat of legal trouble. "She's a child," I screamed. "My child! She's dying in there!" My voice cracked, raw and broken. I was moments from grabbing the tire iron myself when flashing red and blue lights filled the lot. A patrol car skidded to a halt, followed by a fire engine and an ambulance. Uniformed officers and paramedics spilled out, urgency in every step. An officer approached me first, calm but focused. "Ma'am, is that your child in the car?" "Yes," I cried. "She's 5. She's been locked inside. Please help her." My words tumbled out in a frantic rush, but I barely noticed the officer's nod as he turned to assess the situation. Another officer intercepted Karen, who immediately launched into her rehearsed narrative. "I intervened to prevent child abuse," she declared, voice loud enough for all to hear. "This mother abandoned her child in a running car. I locked it to secure the scene." "You did what?" the officer asked, incredulous. "I locked the car to prevent further harm until you arrived," she repeated, her tone righteous. The officer's expression darkened. Meanwhile, the fire crew wasted no time. One firefighter sized up the car while another retrieved tools from the truck. A third crouched by Emily's window, speaking softly to her, trying to gauge her condition through the glass. "We're going to break the window," one firefighter announced. "Everyone stand back." "No, you can't!" Karen shrieked, lunging forward, only to be physically restrained by an officer. Her protests were drowned out by the sharp crack of tempered glass shattering under the firefighter's punch tool. In seconds, the door was open, and strong arms were lifting Emily out of the stifling car. I rushed forward as they laid her on a stretcher, paramedics already working to cool her overheated body, checking her pulse and vitals. I grasped her tiny hand, tears streaming down my face. "I'm here, baby. Mommy's here," I whispered through sobs, brushing damp hair from her burning forehead. Her eyes fluttered open, and the faintest whisper escaped her lips. "Mommy." Relief crashed over me in waves, leaving me trembling and sobbing uncontrollably. She was alive. Barely, but alive. And as the paramedics worked, I glanced up through tear-blurred eyes at Karen, now standing with an officer, her defiant mask beginning to crack. The tide was turning, finally. The scene around me was a blur of flashing lights, urgent voices, and frantic movement. Paramedics worked quickly, placing cold packs under Emily's arms and along her neck, her small body limp on the stretcher. I held her hand tightly, whispering soothing words, though my own voice trembled with the raw edge of panic that still coursed through me. Her skin was hot to the touch, her breath shallow but steadying under the careful watch of the medics. I barely registered anything else until a firm voice beside me broke through the haze. "Ma'am, we need to ask you a few questions." An officer knelt beside me, his tone gentle but businesslike. I nodded, unable to form words yet, my eyes locked on Emily. He gave me a moment before continuing. "Can you tell me exactly what happened? How long was she in the car?" Swallowing hard, I tried to gather my thoughts. 2 minutes. I was inside dropping off paperwork. I left the engine running, AC on, doors unlocked. She was asleep. When I came out, she had locked the doors. My voice cracked as the truth tangled with my desperation to make sense of it all. Or someone had. I don't know how. The officer gave a brief nod, already piecing together the events. Nearby, Karen was still speaking animatedly to another officer, her voice rising in indignation. "I had to intervene. The child was abandoned. I secured the vehicle and called for help." Her words rang out for the gathering crowd, as if she needed an audience to justify her actions. The officer with me glanced toward his colleague, who met his gaze with a subtle shake of the head. He stood and walked over to confer with the others, while I remained by Emily's side, clutching her hand as though sheer will alone could tether her safely to me. I could hear snippets of the conversation, officers questioning Karen about her exact actions. "You locked the doors?" "Well, the car was unattended. I saw the child and it was dangerous to leave her like that. I secured it." "Ma'am, how exactly did you lock the vehicle?" Karen hesitated. I pressed the lock button on the driver's door. It's common sense. The officer's voice turned sharper. You intentionally trapped a child inside a running car during extreme heat. Do you understand the risk that posed to her life? Karen's composure faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered, lifting her chin defiantly. I was protecting her. The mother was irresponsible. A murmur rippled through the crowd, which had grown significantly. Neighbors were no longer passive observers. Many wore expressions of disbelief and disgust. The story was spreading fast among them, and Karen's usual aura of untouchable authority was visibly cracking. Another officer approached me, this one appearing higher ranking. We'll be filing an incident report. Based on initial witness statements, it appears this individual, he gestured toward Karen, interfered in a way that directly endangered your daughter. Do you wish to press charges? I blinked, still dazed, but the words settled heavily in my mind. Yes, I whispered, my voice gaining strength. Absolutely. A paramedic leaned in, updating me quietly. She's stable now. We're taking her to the hospital for observation. You can ride with us. Relief surged through me like a tide. I pressed a kiss to Emily's damp forehead, tears mingling with sweat. I'm coming with you, sweetheart. Mommy's right here. As they wheeled the stretcher toward the ambulance, I caught one last glance at Karen. She stood stiffly, her face pale but defiant, now flanked by two officers. The performance was over. Reality had caught up to her. No amount of righteous bluster could rewrite what had happened. Inside the ambulance, as we sped toward the hospital, I held Emily close, her small fingers curled weakly around mine. The cool air revived her color, little by little. I whispered promises, apologies, anything to keep her anchored and comforted. In the distance, the sirens faded into the hum of the road. The worst had passed, but the storm was far from over. Justice would be demanded, and the neighborhood would not forget what had unfolded on that scorching afternoon. Karen had crossed a line from which there would be no return. The hospital's cool, sterile air was a balm after the suffocating heat of the day. Emily was stable, her cheeks no longer flushed, her breathing steady as she drifted in and out of sleep. I sat by her side, my fingers never leaving hers, the terror of the afternoon slowly giving way to exhausted relief. But even as I watched her rest, my mind churned. I couldn't shake the image of Karen's face as the police closed in around her, nor the cold certainty in her voice as she had tried to explain away her actions. Word of what had happened spread through the neighborhood faster than I could have imagined. By the time I left the hospital with Emily in my arms later that evening, my phone buzzed with messages from neighbors and friends. Screenshots of posts began to appear. Karen had wasted no time crafting her version of the story on the community Facebook page. She had written a long post, painting herself as the hero. According to her, she had saved my daughter from certain death due to my negligence. She claimed she had acted in accordance with HOA guidelines and basic morality, locking the car to preserve the scene until authorities could respond. The post dripped with sanctimony, each sentence laced with passive-aggressive barbs aimed squarely at me. But what Karen had not anticipated was the tidal wave of backlash. The comments beneath her post grew by the minute, most of them furious and incredulous. Neighbors who had witnessed the event firsthand quickly corrected her narrative, recounting how she had deliberately prevented any attempts to rescue Emily. One elderly neighbor, who had been part of the gathering crowd, posted a scathing rebuttal, detailing how Karen had physically blocked someone from breaking the window. You endangered a child for the sake of your own ego, another comment read. You didn't save anyone. You nearly caused a tragedy. Screenshots of the post made their way onto local social media groups, and soon the story was larger than our small HOA community. The words HOA Karen trended in neighborhood forums, her name whispered with equal parts outrage and disbelief. The next HOA meeting was packed. I wasn't sure I had the strength to attend, but the messages of support I'd received urged me forward. When I walked into the room, Emily holding my hand tightly, the chatter died to a hush. Karen sat at the front, flanked by board members, her usual air of superiority visibly diminished. I spoke simply and clearly, recounting exactly what had happened. I didn't need theatrics, the facts spoke volumes. I ended by showing a brief video clip, One of the neighbors had filmed part of the ordeal with their phone, capturing Karen's refusal to let anyone intervene and the arrival of the emergency responders. The room sat in stunned silence as the footage played. When it ended, a board member cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ms. Wilkins, do you have any response?" Karen stood, her face pale but resolute. "I acted in the best interest of the child," she said stiffly. "I believed I was doing what was necessary." The room erupted, not in applause or support, but in a low murmur of disbelief. The board moved swiftly after that. While they couldn't remove her from the neighborhood, they voted to suspend her from any official HOA duties and issued a formal statement condemning her actions. The police investigation would take its own course. In the days that followed, Karen became a pariah. The woman who once ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist now found herself avoided in the streets, her former allies silent. Parents shielded their children from her gaze. The power she had so carefully cultivated had crumbled in a single afternoon. As for me and Emily, we focused on healing. Each time I looked at her now, safe and smiling once more, I was reminded of how fragile life could be and how dangerous a misplaced sense of authority could become. Some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Karen had learned that the hard way, and the neighborhood would never look at her the same again. The days that followed were a blur of recovery and reflection. Emily bounced back faster than I expected, her natural resilience shining through. We kept her close, surrounded by love, careful not to overwhelm her with questions or reminders of that terrifying day. She clung to me more than usual at first, hesitant whenever I stepped out of sight, but slowly, her trust in the safety of her world began to mend. For me, the scars lingered a little longer. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her tiny fists pounding against the glass, heard her voice calling for me through the locked door. The what-ifs haunted me in the quiet hours of the night. What if the police had arrived a minute later? What if I hadn't thought to call 911 immediately? The weight of those thoughts was suffocating at times. The neighborhood changed in subtle ways. People who had once kept to themselves now offered warm smiles and quiet words of support. Neighbors I'd never spoken to before stopped me on the sidewalk to ask how Emily was doing. Karen, once the self-appointed queen of the HOA, had faded into the background, her power dissolved under the glare of public scrutiny. She remained in her house, curtains drawn more often than not, her presence a cautionary tale rather than a source of fear. For our family, the lessons were stark and unforgettable. I would never again assume that a quick errand was without risk, no matter how close or convenient. The trust I had placed in the idea of community was shaken, tempered now with a healthy dose of caution. More than anything, I learned that vigilance must always come second only to the safety of my child, that no appearance of order or rule-following should ever override common sense or compassion. Emily and I talked about it in simple terms, words she could understand. We spoke about good intentions gone wrong, about the importance of listening to your heart when someone needs help. She understood more than I gave her credit for, her small face thoughtful as she nodded. Life slowly returned to normal, but beneath the surface, a quiet strength had taken root. We had weathered a storm we never saw coming, and though the sun now shone a little brighter, the lessons of that scorching day would stay with us forever. And if ever faced with such a choice again, I knew one thing for certain: I would break every window in the world to keep my daughter safe.